I welcome all to the Typo Day 2022 Conference Day 2. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Welcome to the Keynote Vision Address, Session 5 and 6. Let me introduce the session chairman, Dr. Ajanta Singh. Dr. Ajanta Singh, co-chair for Typo Day, is the founder and director of Jello Labs, founder Design in India, and director Solar Project. She has a PhD in development planning from the IIT Bombay, has been engaged in interrupting technologies with respect to cultural paradigms for emerging markets, socio-cultural analysis of design-related issues, and critiquing new media technologies and design issues for the media. Dr. Sen specializes in disciplines of interaction design, social computing, and the evolution of design as a co-evolution of technology. I now request Dr. Ajanta Sen, co-chair of the conference and founder and director Jello Labs, to be the session chairman for session 5 and 6. Over to you.
Thank you, Arivu. Nice to have you here. I have the proud privilege of introducing a very eminent person, Dr. Rukmini Banerji. She needs little introduction. Nonetheless, it's my duty to introduce Rukmini Banerji, our keynote speaker. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Pratham Education Foundation. She has an illustrious academic background, having studied economics at St. Stephen's College, her master's at the D School, the Delhi School of Economics, and then proceeding for a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford University in the early 80s, and then completing a PhD from the University of Chicago in 1991. Rukmini returned to India in 1996 and joined Pratham. I remember that in the mid-90s onwards, we had very active engagement with Madhav Chavan, co-founder of Pratham. And just to say that IDC and us go back a long way in our association with, very happy association with Pratham. Over the years, she has worked extensively in Pratham's education programs in rural and urban areas. And along with the teams, she has played a major role in designing and supporting large-scale partnerships with state governments in India for improving children's learning outcomes. Rukmini stands on a host of accolades, and I'm just naming a few here. In 2008, Rukmini received the Maulana Abul Kalam Shiksha Puraskar by the government of Bihar in India. She was the first recipient of this award. In 2021, Rukmini was awarded the Yidan Prize for Education Development, one of the highest awards in education worldwide, with a very large financial support that is given through the award. Last year, Pratham was awarded the Srimati Indira Gandhi Peace Prize for 2021. And I can tell you that between 2008 and 2021, there were a host of other awards, which also includes Pratham being awarded the Digital Public Goods Award, isn't it, Rukmini? So on that brief but fantastic note on our keynote speaker, Rukmini Banerji, I welcome you to please present your speech today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sen. I have to say at the outset that I was very puzzled when Professor Ravi sent me the invitation. I have never been invited to an IIT to speak on anything. And I had to actually Google the word typography to understand what it meant. And so I tried to dissuade him from having me, but he convinced me that, speaking broadly about the things that we have been working on would be perfectly fine for this audience. So that is what I thought I would do. I've been looking at your conference schedule, and I wished I could have been there in person, because there is so much interesting things that perhaps people like me who are in the world of primary education don't have access to. And in fact, just now we are having a workshop right now here in our office with the top leadership of our early childhood and early years programs. And when I stepped out, I said, this is where I'm going. So there is a lot of interest in IIT ke log is tarah ki cheezon ke upar kya karte hain, hame bhi bataiye. So I hope that we can connect and we can learn from you many of the things that you all are doing. Here's what I thought I could do. Maybe talk for a little while and then open up to have some conversation as well, if that's okay with you. And in my own sort of comments to kick off the discussion, I thought I would do two things. One would be kind of a big macro level picture of where we see children and especially primary or preschool children today, what the opportunities as we see ahead, and perhaps to have a more interesting discussion. I have three stories that have played an important part in my life, in my sort of educational adventures, that I want to just share with your crowd, because each of them, I think, brought up some questions that I've not totally been able to resolve in my head. So I'm also coming to this with an ask. We have a discussion on some of the things that we've been working on. So now for the big picture, very broad, big statistics, some of which I'm sure you all know, but I think it's a good idea to begin. That Pratham's mission when we started in the late 90s was every child in school and learning well. And if we look back at how far has India come on this, I would say the every child in school is almost there. We have over 96% children in the age group 6 to 14 enrolled in school, at least the statistics before the pandemic hit for that. Not only that, if you look at enrollment in, say, class 8 over the years, if you take the period 2008 to 2018, remember that there is about 25 million children in India in each age group, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, and so on, roughly speaking. In 2008, statistics show that about 11 to 12 million was our enrollment in Standard 8 in 2008. In 2017-18, that enrollment number is close to 22 million, which means that not only are children enrolled in school, but they are staying the full course. And more or less in the last 5 years, I would say that almost every family in India has somebody who has reached up to 8th standard. So this is a huge accomplishment for a country like ours. So every child in school and staying in school and getting at least up to 8th, let us say we are very close to making this happen for almost all children. But what about learning well? Now, this every child learning well has been something that we have been sort of grappling with for almost 20 years, starting from what does learning mean, what does well mean, and of course, once you have some definition of that, even for our own working purposes, how do you get that done? Now, you may be familiar with the ASER reports, the annual status of education reports, which have been facilitated by Pratham for the last many years, since 2005. From 2005 to 2014, this exercise was carried out in every rural district in India every year. It's a sample from each district, but a household level sample, but almost about 1,000 children or more from each district every year were sampled. And which makes, of course, if you have 600 districts, a very large sample. Since 2014, we've done it every alternate year till 2018. But all of these data, which actually look at very basic reading and very basic arithmetic, show that children are persistently at a much lower level, even on very basic skills, than what we expect them to be. Now, why did we pick reading and why did we pick basic arithmetic? Because I think that unless you learn how to read, you cannot move further, whether in life or in school. And once you learn to read, there's some amount of self-reliance on yourself about being able to go forward. Of course, along with reading, there needs to be understanding, there has to be curiosity and many things. But if I have to think about a way in which at least the academic part of learning can move ahead, then I think without reading and without basic number knowledge or basic ability to do some operations, you cannot move ahead. Now, these are the big statistics. We can go on. For example, 2018, if I look at children in class 3 who were at, let us say, reading at least at a standard 2 level, we find across rural India, and this is a household sample. So remember that it has private school children, government school children, children going to all kinds of other education enterprises, and also maybe a few children who don't go to school. So putting them all together, if I look at children of that age group, or if I look at children who are enrolled in school and in class 3, the number is that below 30% children are actually at grade level, which means that our school system or the way we treat children in school leaves children 70% children behind within the first couple of years of school. And then, of course, the top of the class moves on. You probably increasingly leave more children behind. But a big reason, I think, for children getting left behind are because they did not progress at the rate at which the curriculum or the textbook or the expectations were. So that is the big number. One of the well-known headlines of ASR is that class 5 in India, 50% of the children are yet unable to perform at a class 2 level. There are 50% who may be going ahead, but these are the kinds of numbers that give you some indication of where are we with every child learning and learning well, maybe in extension of that. Now, what are the implications of that actually on the ground? I usually put it in this very simple way, that if I think about a class, which is a part of some of these large, big statistics, I have a teacher who is teaching the class, but she is sometimes quite, I would say, demotivated. And the reason for her demotivation is because she sees that whatever she is doing with the class, there is a certain number of children, usually in the front of the class, who are responding and who are moving ahead. But she knows that there are a lot of children in that class who are not being able to grapple with what she's doing. And what she is doing is usually what is standardly done in most schools, is that if she's teaching a class 4 language class, she has the class 4 textbook in her hand and she's somewhere in some chapter in the textbook. But she can feel that while a few children are with her, there is a lot of children who are not. And naturally, for anybody who teaches, this can be a very demotivating, experience. I think about the parents of the children who are in that class, who often have not perhaps had much education themselves. So they have high aspirations for their children, but they also have a sense that for a majority of these children, especially I'm talking about children in government schools, that they are disappointed with what schooling is doing with their children, because they want their children to have the best that is possible within their own resources to give them. And they feel that each year in school is not adding that value to their children in the way that they had imagined. So we have demotivated teachers, we have disappointed parents. And what about the children themselves? Those who are sitting in the back of the class often don't come back after the midday meal. And I think they realize that they are disconnected from what is going on. Some children blame themselves. They say that humko samajh mein nahi aa rahi hai, that something is wrong with me, therefore I'm not getting it. Others may feel that this is not for me. So I think that we increasingly have disengaged children from what is happening in the class. Now, this whole thing together produces the persistently low levels that we see in our data in the big picture. So clearly a solution is needed, because you cannot have 25 million children in each age group with a large proportion of the children feeling this way. And from the time, I would say early 2000s, as Pratham, we've been trying to see what is it that people like us, who are sort of ordinary people, can do to change this. Because both families and governments are investing in this whole thing called schooling. And yet it's not producing. If you don't move in line with the age and grade expectations of what the school system requires, then somehow you're sort of losing out and getting left behind. And one of the things we picked, as I've already said, is reading. Now, if you are in class 3, you're already 8 years old, your curriculum has moved far ahead of you. Are there ways in which there is something that can be done with you, something that is relatively simple to do, something that is affordable, that can suddenly bring up your level of reading and help you to engage? And, it may in my, 5 minutes talk to you sound simple, but I would say over the last 15 years or so or more, we have worked on something, a method, which is nothing incredibly dramatic. It is what exactly we do with our own children at home, which is I start from where the child is, understand where the child is getting stuck, get over that barrier, and then move ahead. Now, this method is really the real crux of this method is our entire school system is constructed by age and grade. If you think about bricks, it is sort of like there is one brick for standard 1, one for standard 2, one for standard 3. The children who are passing over these bricks are expected to sort of be able to master or at least cope with whatever they did in the previous grade and then move on. And many of our schools, including private schools, don't really have a mechanism to deal with children who didn't make the pace that was expected of them. So in the method that we use, which is called in English, somehow somebody gave it the name, teaching at the right level. All teaching should be at the right level or should be at an appropriate level. Think about the school system as a grid of rows and columns, where currently we tend to think of each class as a row and one row on top of the other row going through the school system. And then bring in this idea of that children are reading at different levels. There's a huge variation in each grade. And therefore, if you've seen the USER tool, and I wish I could have actually projected it, the USER tool, the measurement of reading or the assessment of reading, has letters, simple words, everyday common words, a simple paragraph, 4 lines, actually with a sentence on each line, and then a story which has lines which are wrapped, but a simple story which is about 8 or 10 lines. Now, if I look at India or even an individual class, class 3, class 4, class 5, in any rural school, especially a government school, you will see that in each of these 3 classes, there are children in each of these categories. So what we felt was useful was rather than teaching class 3 separately on some separate things and class 5 on separate things, because many children in these classes are not at that grade level, think of twisting from rows to columns, where each column is a particular level. And the minute you do that, within a week, children move to the next level and to the next level and to the next level. So this teaching at the right level, moving from rows to columns, in Hindi or in many Indian languages, actually, originally the method was called Kamal. And Kamal is because we thought of a different acronym later, Combined Activities for Maximized Learning. But Kamal actually wanted to convey that if you figure out the right way to reorganize this whole business about teaching and learning, you can have a Kamal effect, which is to say, things that I didn't achieve for the last 3, 4, 5 years, suddenly by unlocking my potential, by coming to me at my level, giving me appropriate activities and appropriate materials, appropriate texts to deal with, I can somehow go ahead. And by whenever Pratham people conduct these, what we call learning camps, we find that in a period of 1 or 2 hours a day and anywhere between a month and 2 months, a majority of children at least begin to read fluently with some understanding. So there is a big problem, but we feel there are solutions. And these solutions can be used widely. They've been used by state governments, they've been used in communities and so on. Now, so there's a problem, there is a solution. But I want to quickly now move to the child. When you look at a child who earlier was not able to read and now has gone through and been using this method or any other method and is reading, what is the difference that you see? If you watch children before or if you see their videos, you find that children who earlier could not do what you were asking them to do often don't meet you in the eye, rub their nose, shuffle, look for an opportunity to run away. Whereas once they're able to read, the backbone is straighter, eyes are in your eyes, the voice is louder. So this whole business of reading is also a way of unlocking your own potential and giving you the awareness that you actually can learn and you have learned and you can do more. So these 3, demotivation of teachers, disappointment of parents, and disinterest of children, turns around when this happens because everybody feels that what we are doing with our children, including children themselves, is leading them to our next level. So I don't need to convince people that this whole business of reading is as dramatic as learning to ride a bicycle or learning to swim. It's a key part of our growing up, and at least in modern times. And this is a process that needs to be accelerated, supported, and extended so that those children who have not made this jump at the right age or have not even made it at a later age have to be helped to do this. Along comes our new education policy. I know the policy has been discussed at many forums with many different angles. But from our point of view, at least from the work that Pratham has been doing, we feel that at least for the primary age group, there are many, many positives, including this national goal. So the policy is 56 pages long. On page 7 or 8, there is one portion that I feel should be brought out and put on billboards everywhere. And it says that if by class 3, fundamental, foundational literacy and numeracy is not in place, then the rest of the policy is irrelevant. And at some level, I think this is the goal, that every child in school and learning well. If you're able to do this by class 3, then many, many things after that become possible. And so now, not only is there an acceptance that this is that we have a problem, but there is also a national priority to say that as a country, as a society, not just as a school system. Of course, the school system must work on it, but we, as the people of India, I think need to focus our energy, because if we are able to reach this national goal, and not just literacy and numeracy, I think these foundational skills are more than that, but certainly literacy and numeracy are maybe the tips of the iceberg that are visible. If we are able to do this, then I think the next 50 years destiny of India has a potential to be very different. So obviously I'm biased, but I think this is one of the most important things that we as a country in the next 5 to 6 years have to show that it's possible. These are problems that exist in other parts of the world as well. But if we can achieve significant progress on this, I think it will be a incredible game changer for us, and of course for anybody else who's suffering from this problem. Now, so I want to stop now and move to my stories. Story number 1 is from Allahabad. Some years ago, I was in Allahabad and we were talking about reading. And of course, once 200 million children learn to read, they will need things to read. They will need things that are of interest to them, that are accessible to them in many different ways, not just in terms of price, but in terms of being able to actually read and move forward. So we were struggling with this in Allahabad, and I said, what is out there for children to read who've just learned to read? And we were a group of about 20 people, and we divided ourselves up into smaller groups. Each of us took 5,000 rupees, took 3 days, not each of us, each group took 5,000 rupees. 3 days later, we came back together to look at what could we have bought in a city like Allahabad. And you would be very surprised that almost each of our groups had some money left over, because you just couldn't find enough to buy for this level. And what we were able to buy tended to be in 2 categories. And of course, what we had said is we will not buy anything that is more than 100 rupees a book. What we were able to buy tended to be either alphabet books, or they tended to be stories which had a big moral in it. And between the combination of these 2, we still had lots of money left over. So one thing that I learned from there is that I have learned to read, but my reading needs to be kept going. So, one of the ways is that, I have to have material to read. Our newspapers have very little for children. Having separate children's magazines coming to every family may be difficult. My schools often don't have libraries, but even if they did, at that time, at least a few years ago, there was not enough that I could buy to actually even bring into a library. Story number 2, and I myself am from Bihar, and we've done a lot of work in UP and Bihar. So all my 3 stories are from either UP or Bihar. Second story is from Raebareli. We were working with class 1 and 2 teachers across UP in a joint program with UP government. Again, this is from a few years ago. And one of the things that we did in the work with the teachers was to say, ki aap apne bachon ke liye, you for your own children, can you write a small story, 6 lines, 8 lines, 10 line story that you think your children will enjoy. And I was going from Lucknow towards Jaunpur. And I called a colleague of mine who was in Raebareli, and I said that yesterday you had some teachers' workshops. Can you share some of the stories that the teachers have written? So my colleague said, she said in Hindi, aapko kitne kahaniyan chahiye, kitne wajan ki kahaniyan chahiye? because they had bags and bags of stories. So she gave me what she called a half-kilo bag of stories as I passed through Raebareli. When I reached Jaunpur that night, I started reading these stories. They were all very, very simple stories written by class 1 and 2 government school teachers. And one of the things that struck me the most was the care with which these had been written. Each of them had been decorated. There was ballpoint pen, but there was, beautiful writing. Beautiful sort of decorations around it. Teachers had tried to write in this sort of slightly larger print. And some of the stories were perhaps stories that have been well known, but the care with which they were written was almost overwhelming. Some months later, there was a conference at NCERT about children and reading, and there was lots of discussion about what is good quality. And I put up my hand and I gave this example, and I said, to me, this is the beginning of quality when a teacher wants to write for her children. Our failure in that context was, it took me a whole night to read the half-kilo of stories, which was just a very, very small drop in the ocean that had been created. And I requested, experts at NCERT to say, can you help us devise a method by which we can encourage this outpouring of writing? And unfortunately, nobody even commented on my comments. And I was told that there are 40 story books that NCERT has produced. आप उनको बांट दें और उससे वो क्वालिटी का अंदाजा आ जाएगा. Third story, and I'll stop after that, is that I was in my own hometown, which is Patna. And this was with a group of children who were being ready to come into school. So they were kids of all ages, about 8, 10, 12. And these are children who, for one reason or another, were not enrolled in school at the time, and we were getting them ready. Now, this little class was sitting as a group very close to the Ganga. And so I was chatting with them, and I thought I should ask them something very obvious. And I said to them, Ganga ji kahan se aati hai? Where does Ganga come from? And they looked at me in a very astounded way, as if this was one of the silliest questions anybody could ask. And they said, Ganga ji samundar se aati hai. The Ganga comes from the ocean. I was very taken aback by this question, because I said, why do you say that? And very easily they said, because the ocean has a lot of water and the river has a lot of water. And so these are connected, and that's how they come. There was no way in which anything I said after that convinced them that Gangaji came from anywhere else. And finally, to sort of ease me out of my misery, they said to me, Chalo, Gangaji Shivji ki jata se aati hai. Come on, now we will just accept that maybe Gangaji comes out of Shivji's, hair. But that was really just to make me feel better that we had reached a consensus somewhere. But this really bothered me. And of course, the children were also very surprised that there were places in the world that did not have a Gangaji right next to them. They could not imagine a city where there is no, or a place or a village where there is no Gangaji. Now, this bothered me for a long time, thinking that how do I convince children about where Ganga comes from? So I went, I have a friend, two friends, in fact. I think in the 80s, there was a Doordarshan series on Ganga. And, it was, of course, a documentary which I could not get hold of. But a picture book had been made from some of the stills from that. And so this was available on Pratham Books. Pratham Books brought it out, a picture of the Ganga, which had pictures from Gangotri downwards all the way to Ganga joining the ocean. And we created this picture book. The pictures were selected. And then there was this big question about what text should this have? Because should it be a description? And I'll not get into finally what the text there was. But I remember taking this book to another class somewhere in Bihar, again near the river. Before sharing the book with them, I asked them again the same question about where does Ganga come from? And the children there had many answers. I could see one child who did not say anything, but you could see from his face that there were lots of things that were going through his mind. So I went up to him and I said, can you tell me what you're thinking? And the child said, why did you ask this question? Because Ganga ji kahin se aati bhi nahi hai, jati bhi nahi hai, wo hamesha hamare saath hi rehti hai. The Ganga ji does not come from anywhere, does not go anywhere. She's always here. So why did you ask this question? So I want to just stop because I think each of these stories have something that tells us about children, about books, about reading. And I think that these are the kinds, perhaps these and many, many others, questions that we need to grapple with as we think about how will we reach our national priority and how will we all participate in some way. And I know you all have very specialized interests. And so perhaps the discussion that we could possibly have can help us in coming up with more ideas about what we can do next. So let me stop here, Dr. Ajanta, and hand over back to you.
Hi, Rukmini. You can just call me Ajanta. I think this sets the pace for conceiving a bridge between Pratham and setups like Pratham, which actually have become the motherhead of figuring out how learning can happen with children and, interestingly, with underserved children. And then our audiences here who have a lot of tools which are fantastically visual and very, very motivated towards communicating with audience groups like yours. And so I would now request the audience to please ask Rukmini questions or make observations. Now, do know that, and many of you know, that Pratham is known for its stories. So the story number 2 of Rukmini is the one in Patna, the bag full of stories, which is so much like our Thakumar Jhuli, right? The grandmother's bag of stories. And so that metaphor and the metaphor of the descent of Ganga from Mahadev's knotted hair and then becoming the Ganga and going into Sagar, these were actually meant for children to understand origin stories, creation stories, other stories. And somehow in our cognitive zeal to push knowledge, we forgot about these. And Pratham was pioneering in picking these up and creating stories. So Rukmini, it would be good if you can actually let the audience know a little bit about your stories, because you have an eager audience waiting to share their tools with you. And many of them can actually step forward and do some of their work around the work that you're doing, because we need to synergize these efforts, right? And, you know, our audiences, not only that they're creative, many of them are faculty members who have students. Many of them are students themselves who would like to go ahead and do meaningful internships. Many of them have worked in academics, but are working with industries. Many of them have consulting services of their own. And so you actually are sitting in the midst of a great synergetic opportunity. And I don't see why every keynote has to be this one-way delivery. I think you can forthwith start a discussion with the audience group. And I request the audiences to please come forth and ask Rukmini in what way you can be a part of what she's doing and how she can be a part of some of your initiatives. And we have a lot of very young students doing a lot of interesting stuff on social media, right? The new medias. We have a lot of young in the audience. We have a lot of very erudite, scholarly folks as well. So you're very well placed to now start talking to them. So if maybe you could tell them a little bit about your stories, also the Google initiative, etc., just to set the pace, and then they can come in.
I see that Dr. Ravi has his hand up.
Yeah.
Maybe we should hear from him.
Yeah. So, Rukmini, I want to ask you, because, you said everything, right? I mean, you said the stories, you put in the context. Okay. So it would be great if you can just, very briefly mention, how do you actually, you have this ageless group, right, who doesn't know how to read. Can you let us know in a couple of instances, how do you get them to read? I mean, what is the method that you use?
Yeah, so I think that may be a good place because stories play a big role in that. Right. So number one is that when we work with children, whether it is inside the school or outside the school, and we use this method for kids who are 8 and above or class 3 and above. So I cannot take to them a first standard textbook because children have dignity, they have a sense of self, and I have to use their strength and not sort of lower that dignity. So what we usually do is we give them a little booklet of stories. Often the paper is very patla paper because, that it's a It's a one-time or a two-time use story, correct? And one of the fundamental things which instinctively we have done, I'm sure there are many people in this audience who can help us do it far better, is that the story is such that you can almost like swallow it in one gulp. Okay. So large font, simple sentences, and a picture, of course. And our first activity that we do in our Kamal or our teaching at the right level is we will read a story out loud. So you read a story out loud once or twice. After the first or second time, the teacher says, put your finger as I'm saying the word so that you have a sense of how print works. And then we'll have a discussion on the story. Now, this having a story book of yours, and it's not even a book, it's like a little patla booklet, I have realized means a huge amount to children because it's their own book, it's not a textbook. We know, for example, from our ASER survey that less than 20% of rural kids have any reading material in their house, which is not a religious book or a newspaper or a textbook. So having your own thing for yourself is very important. Now, this reading activity, if you do it every day, and we use one story for 2 or 3 days, very often the children then pretend read. We've seen small children in our families pretend read, but older children pretend read as well, because they know because they've been read aloud to them, they know what reading sounds like. They know what reading looks like. And even if you can't actually read, these stories are small enough that and we find that role modeling actually very important because you're, kind of imitating what you really want to be. Then we play some games saying, let us say that this story had the word Nani, and Nani was a character. So Nani, I write the word Nani down and say, let's look for where all this is. So we can pictorial, you can treat it as a picture and you find this. So this is a story-related activity where we say that hearing the story, pretend reading of the story, and discussion around the story, and hunting for visual cues in the story are important. Then we do a set of activities with a Barakhadi chart, which almost all our languages have, which connect the sight and the sound. And I know there are more technical terms for that, so that there is a predictable pattern. And once you know what that pattern is, you can actually find that sound in any of these lines. A third thing that we do is that we play word games, oral games, again, to kind of strengthen the sight and sound thing, so that, when I say, let's say Nani, so Nani ki tarah aur kya words hai, Nani, Pani, Lani, Tani. And if I write them on the board, you can see that certain things look very similar and certain parts don't. I can find them on my Barakhadi chart so that I'm doing these visual connections and the sound connections to do this. And the final activity that we do is we say, whatever you're thinking, can you put it down on paper or on the floor or on a blackboard? Now, we are very careful to say that writing has a certain significance. Drawing has a certain meaning. So we say, kuch banao. So that banao can be any one of these. So children often start by drawing pictures. One of the first things that happens when children get print material is that their drawings change. Because, that's the first thing that you can do. And without actually even really nudging, children begin to do some pretend writing. And that pretend writing over the course of the next 1 month or so becomes actual words. And then when I say, for example, I'll give you an example. I was in one group and the girl that I was talking to was about 9 years old. And I said to her, ab kuch banao? And actually to her, I said, kuch likho. She said, mujhe likhna nahi aata. I don't know how to write. So I said, try it, because I think you do. And she said, no, I don't. So I said, okay, tell me what you want to write. So she said, and I had to push her quite a bit. She said, Mera naam Sabiya hai. Mera naam Sabiya hai. So I said, write it. So she scribbled something which had a few alphabets which were correct. Then she said, ye galat hai. So I said, why do you say galat hai? She said, because my finger is not moving. When it is something that you read, your finger must move, because that's what she had been doing. So I said, okay, how about you first say it slowly? So it took a couple of rounds and then she said, Mera naam Sabila hai. We went to the Barakhadi chart because by this time it had been about 10 days into the class. She knew the alphabets. Ma kidhar hai? She found Ma. I said, go down the line, tell me me kidhar hai? She could find it. It took a painful 10 minutes, but she was able to write using the Barakhadi chart and repeatedly saying the words, Mera naam Sabila hai. And of course, the whole class was watching. And I was quite tense because I thought if this exercise does not lead to where I want it to lead, it's going to be a total flop. Okay. And my entire method will go crashing down. And children are tough critics, as we know. And she turned around to me, and I'll never forget that moment. And she said, "Aur batao, kya likhna hai?" Okay. Now, so I would say that this is just a description of how all the pieces of what we do come together. But this, how do you get, and there's a question that somebody had put in, how do you get children interested? I think some of this is this interaction between, I can't do it, but you can do it. I'll help you, but I'll not hold your hand. I'll give you interesting things. And these little stories are written often by the teachers or by our own people. It's not like it's any great. Illustrators are often whoever we can find. But I feel that this process, I think, works because you're somehow getting everybody into the fray.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rukmini. Let me read out some of the messages on our chat here. Nitin Daga says, "Ma'am, how could one arouse curiosity and let it stay in children? Because I have noticed that with curiosity on academics, children at least get interested in studying, else they find the whole activity boring."
So, I mean, part of my answer was actually addressed to that. I think that it's like you have to actually, with anybody, whether it's students or with anyone that you're chatting with, you have to be connected to each other at some level. So, even when we are doing just simple storytelling, you change the story so that you can keep people's interest going. One example I gave you is that, you have to have activities engaging you in this process. I'll give you another example. These little booklets are everywhere. So I was in one classroom in Madhya Pradesh, I think, and I asked the children, it was again a partnership with the government. These little booklets have been printed by the government, given to everyone. So I asked the children, "Kahani kaise lagi? How do you like this story?" So very polite children, "This is bahut achhi, bahut achhi." So I said, "No, tell me more. If we had to give you another little booklet, what should it have?" And the kids slowly said to me, "The story is fine, it's okay. But हमें acting करनी होती है. And sometimes we are tired of being the tree or the stone because there's not enough role for us in the story." Now, again, I would say this is comment coming from the kids. If I'm able to now give them a story soon after this, which has enough for everybody to do, because I know that these kids like to act it out, they are going to want more, and very soon when they can write, they will write their own stories like this. I'm not ready because I was in the middle of something, but I have a little video clip where the kids in these 60 days were actually writing better things than we were giving them. And they know what it looks like. So they know that it has to look like this, and there has to be a picture, and so different kinds of pictures. So this, I think it's all to your participants' question. It's about how do we engage with it. There's no magic formula, I don't think. How do you engage? How do you create? And to me, those UP teachers who wrote their sweet little things, if everybody began to write, because if you're a reader and you want something to read every day, we need 250 million things every day for 250 million children to read. What can produce, I mean, I'm not, that's excessive, but I'm saying that it has to be a constant generation, of different kinds of things that children are exposed to, so that who is interested in what direction do they want to go in, can all begin to come out.
So, Rukmini, this sight and sound connect that you're talking about, and which is what, for example, our mothers instill in us at a very early age. That's the first thing we hear them say things and then draw it out, and then steering our fingers around those letters, etc. Right? This sensory connect is often ignored. It's not consciously understood, right? Because I think we take it for granted. And I think there's a possibility of also connecting adult education with children so that the mother who's not yet literate can learn with the child, and then they can grow together. And it reminds me of the film The Reader, where Kate Winslet has been sent to jail. And she had an enormous love for stories, and she was sent these stories. And she would read the stories and get the book from the prison library and start matching the words it said with, and that's how she learned to write slowly. So that, and that at her age, she was like 50, 50s or 60s at that time. So, Rukmini, would you like to elaborate a little bit on this sensory thing? Because you already said performance, so that is gestures, sight and sound. Do they also bring in associations of taste, smell, etc., the kind of the vernacular environment.
I think the Barakhari chart, which is not a modern invention, I don't know what the history of the Barakhari chart is, but it's been around, is actually a fantastic way of encouraging this what is called phonological awareness, right? What is the matching of the sight and sound? Very often when children read, they will say ma, mame, aki matra, ma. See, all this saying of things actually gets in the way. So, for example, if you're reading Kamal, but you say ka se kabutar, ma se machli, la se lal, how will you get to Kamal? Because what you need to do is ka, ma, la.
Yeah.
Now if you say ka me iki matra, cha me cha uki matra, it gets in the way of actually connecting the visual, and the Barakhari actually gives you each unit that can be connected to a sound. And therefore, I think that languages like many of ours are much easier, because what you see is what you get, compared to English or some other languages. I don't know in many other foreign languages where you don't get where that same visual symbol can be said in different ways. Now, these are technical things that perhaps linguists and others can tell you more. But I do think that the Barakhari chart, our nonsense rhymes, these are all natural. What I would say, we are unconscious about what they are doing to us, but which propose, which Ajanta, you will know this, Shohaj Path, first book the first text in a way that Tagore wrote, the first, it's almost like an annaprashan for reading. Okay, the first taste that you get in your mouth is so beautiful.
Yes.
Between the woodcut drawings. So I know we are probably running out of time, but I have to say this because it's one of my most favorite things to say. The first paragraph of this first text goes, Bone thake bag, gache thake pakhi, jole thake mach. Simple, very, very simple sentence. And the illustration that goes with it is exactly this. Now, once you read this and you connect, I think it just brings out that you can write very simple things in such, of course, Tagore is, superstar in doing lyrical things in simple ways. But I often use this Shohaj Path in teacher trainings with languages that don't know Bangla, because as soon as you get it and you see it, it automatically improves how you're thinking and how you're visualizing what your first taste of reading should be like. So the taste of reading is not just reading, it's the visual, it's the sensory. Yes. I think it's all of these. Right?
Yes. And he scales up to becoming complex, where he said Erabat, which is elephant, and he uses the eye of the Erabat for the trunk of the elephant. And it becomes so clear to children. Yes, Shohaj Path is a masterpiece. The images, the woodcut images, and how he lyrically actually does semantic designing, because forest is forest and fish in water is fish. It's nothing else but that, just direct associations. So Rukmini, it would be nice if both Rukmini and audiences reach out to one another and be able to work out tools. Yesterday, there was a presentation where someone presented what is called Naya Shabd. And each word, each letter was semantically designed. So it's like, the child aiming at the North Star, the star having directional elements, would be so much simpler to actually work with similar tools. So Rukmini, we thank you for making the time. We know that you're super busy, and we look forward to working with you. I remember in the 90s, in the mid-90s, into the early 2000s, Madhav Chavan would come and attend the jury presentations of the students. And he would say, okay, what if I could have a book designed like this? And then a student would take that up.
Uh-huh.
And it would be fruitful for both ends, because
we would love to do that. We would love to, And I put my email in the chat just so that immediately, at least some emails can be exchanged.
Right.
We would love to work with, people who are interested in this and, do a better job than what we are doing. Use all the know-how that many people in your groups may have. And that's the reason that I thought when Professor Ravi asked me that I should say yes, because there's the whole world that I know nothing about. And I reminded Madhav as well that you are connected, now go get reconnected again.
Reconnected is the word, right? And now it's easier to reconnect because of the digital domain. Madhav didn't have it at that time. So on that very fruitful, productive, creative note where there's a whole world of possibilities, opportunities are opening up, they were always there, and there are a whole bunch of interested faculty and students who would like to be able to do live projects that are out there, seen by people, and helping kids on top of that, just knowing how it is being used, right, Rukmini? So I request the audience to make use of this opportunity, reach out to Rukmini and she will reciprocate, and you can take things forward. And on that note, power to you, Rukmini, to Pratham, to you, to Madhav, and to your team. And the awards that I read out were just the tip of the iceberg, and I'm sure there are many more yet to come. And I know that awards are the reward of doing such thing is the act of doing itself. You never intended the awards, right? You're not really looking to earn all of that, but you have, and it just says that you have been at it for decades. And it's bearing fruit. And I think it's time that we all sort of surround that tree of fruits and be, get to because it's an ecosystem, right? So some of us are the branches there, some of are the leaves, are the foliage, the insect, the earthworm, etc. Each one can then begin to, nourish the tree. So on that note, Rukmini, I thank you for making the time. On behalf of Typo Day, we look forward to interacting with you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.